I overheard my sister tell my parents, "Once grandfather's $780K lake house is in our names, we're throwing that useless parasite out before dinner." So I let them walk into grandfather's estate meeting, where the attorney slowly opened one sealed folder and my sister stopped smiling. The hallway carpet in my parents' house has a water stain near the bathroom door that has been there since I was 14. I was standing on that stain when I heard my sister say it. I had come to pick up Grandpa Emmett's recipe box, the one Danielle had taken from the lake house kitchen the day after the funeral, before I could even get to it. She had not asked. She had not mentioned it. She drove to the lake house while I was at the cemetery, sitting on the bench near Emmett's plot, and she packed the box into the back of her car, along with 2 serving platters, a ceramic lamp from his study, and a stack of his monogrammed towels. When I got back to the house that evening, the kitchen shelf where the recipe box had sat for 37 years was empty. I called her. She said, "It was just collecting dust, Wren. I will sort through it and send you anything useful." She did not sort through it. She put it in her garage. I found out because my father mentioned it 2 weeks later, casually, the way he mentioned everything. "Your sister has a box of Emmett stuff in the garage. You can swing by and grab whatever." So I swung by. October 18th, 18 days after the funeral. 2 days before the estate meeting. I parked in the driveway and walked through the side door that led to the hallway near the bathroom. The recipe box was sitting on the hall table where Danielle had left it for me. I could see through the kitchen doorway that the light was on and there were 2 coffee mugs on the counter. Danielle and my mother were sitting at the table. I was reaching for the recipe box when Danielle's voice came through the wall. Clear, confident, the voice of someone who had already decided the outcome before the meeting had been scheduled. "Once grandfather's lake house is in our names, we're throwing that useless parasite out before dinner." My mother's voice followed. Softer in volume, identical in certainty. "She can stay with Lucy or whoever that friend of hers is. We need to move fast before she gets ideas about contesting anything." Danielle again. "She is not going to contest anything, Mom. She works at a daycare. She makes $23,000 a year. She has no savings, no connections, no lawyer. What is she going to do? Write a strongly worded letter?" My mother laughed. "She cannot even write a check without calling to ask how. I already talked to Janet at the office. She thinks we list at 800, close in 60 days. By Christmas, this is done." My father was in the kitchen too. I knew because I heard his chair creak against the floor. He said nothing. He never said anything when Danielle and my mother were building a plan together. His silence was his permanent vote, and it had never been challenged by anyone in that house except Emmett. There was a pause. Then Danielle again, lower this time, the voice people use when they are confirming logistics. "Dad, you need to be at Harris's office Sunday morning. 10 sharp. We go in together, we present as a family, and we make it clear that the house is a family asset." Wren sits there and nods. If she makes a scene, we handle it after. Gordon's chair creaked again. He did not answer verbally. He never did. But the chair creak meant yes. It always meant yes. I stood on that water stain for 11 seconds. I counted them the way I count when a child at the kindergarten is about to melt down and I need to decide whether to step in or let them work through it. 11 seconds. Then I picked up the recipe box, tucked it under my arm, and walked out the front door without closing it behind me. In my car, I opened the box. The recipes were inside, written on index cards in Emmett's handwriting. I found the one I was looking for. Yellowed, stained in the bottom right corner with blackberry juice from the summer I was 12, and knocked the colander sideways. His handwriting was fading. The ink on the word blackberries was so light I had to tilt the card toward the streetlight to read it. 2 months before he died, the last Sunday he was strong enough to sit at the kitchen table. Emmett had held my hand across the surface and looked at me with the kind of focus the dementia usually took from him. He had a good day that day. He remembered my name. He remembered what month it was. and he said 5 words that I did not understand at the time. I took care of it, sweetheart. Then he squeezed my hand and added, just show up to the meeting. Can you do that for me? I said I would. He nodded and went back to looking at the lake through the kitchen window. I sat in my parents' driveway holding that recipe card and hearing my sister's voice through the wall and understanding finally what Emmett meant. He had known. He had heard them planning this months before I did, and he had already moved. I put the card back in my wallet. I drove home to the lake house, parked in the gravel spot next to the dock, and sat in the car watching the water change color as the sun dropped behind the tree line. I could have called Danielle. I could have texted my mother. I could have said, Grandpa changed something. Be careful what you say at that meeting. But Emmett had told me to show up. And Emmett had never told me to do anything without a reason. So I let them walk in first. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal and the moment the truth finally walks into the room, subscribe to Betrayal Unfolded and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. I moved into Emmett's lake house in May of 2022. He was 79 then, and the vascular dementia had started leaving gaps in his days, small ones at first. He would stand in the kitchen holding a glass of water and forget why he had poured it. He would call me by my mother's name, then press his thumb against his temple and say, "Sorry, kid, you look like her." Back before she stopped looking like herself, nobody else volunteered. Danielle was running the real estate office and said she could not take time off. My mother said 42 minutes was too far to drive every day, like it was a commute across 3 counties instead of a straight shot down Route 9. My father said he would come by on weekends. He came twice in the first 3 months and then stopped pretending he was coming at all. A professional and home caregiver in our county costs roughly $4,800 a month. That was what the family would have paid if they had hired someone. Instead, I went. I reduced my hours at the kindergarten from full-time to part-time. My salary dropped from $38,000 to $23,400. I managed Emmett's medications and sorted his pills into a weekly organizer every Sunday night. I drove him to his neurologist in Cedar Falls every 6 weeks. I cooked his meals. On Tuesdays, he wanted tomato soup. On Fridays, he wanted grilled cheese with the crusts cut off, and I cut them off every time because it made him smile. I slept on the floor beside his bed when the night terrors started. He would grab my hand at 2 a.m. and hold it until dawn. Some nights, he talked to my grandmother June, who had been dead for 9 years, and I sat in the dark listening to him tell her about the weather and the dock and the cobbler. And I did not correct him, because correcting a man who missed his dead wife felt like something only a cruel person would do. The first summer I lived there, we made the cobbler together one Sunday afternoon. I was 27. He was 79. He stood at the counter with his hands over mine and showed me the way he had shown me every summer since I was 9 years old. More sugar, he said. Life is too short for a dry cobbler. His hands shook that summer. They had not shaken when I was 9. Back then, his hands were steady and warm, and he held the mixing spoon with me. And we stood in that kitchen with the afternoon light coming through the window, and he told me about the year he built the dock, how he had to rebuild it twice, because the first set of pilings were too shallow, and the winter current shifted them. He said, "The thing about building something that lasts, kid, is you have to put the foundation where nobody can see it." He wrote the recipe on an index card that same summer, wrote it in pencil first, then went over it in ink because he said pencil fades and recipes should outlast the people who make them. He handed the card to me and said, "This is yours now. Every summer you make it, I am standing next to you." I was 9 years old. I put the card in a shoebox under my bed. 20 years later, it was in my wallet, and it had outlasted him the way he said it would. The year before he died, Emmett's condition worsened. There were weeks when he could not remember which room was the bathroom. There were nights when he stood at the front door in his pajamas, trying to walk to a grocery store that had closed in 2011. I installed a chain lock on the inside of the door at eye level so he could not get out after midnight. I taped labels on every cabinet, cups, plates, medications, towels. I did these things between 6 in the morning and 11 at night, every day, for 2 years, while earning $23,400 and watching my savings account empty to $1,100. If the family had hired a professional and home caregiver, the cost would have been roughly $4,800 a month. Over 2 years, that was more than $115,000 in labor they never paid for, because I was there. What the family saw was something else entirely. They saw a 29-year-old woman living rent-free in a $780,000 lakefront property. They saw a girl with no apartment, no savings, no husband, and no visible ambition who had found a comfortable arrangement and dressed it up as sacrifice. Danielle told my mother I was playing nurse. Patricia told neighbors at the hardware store I was keeping Emmett company, reading to him and making little meals. They reduced 2 years of round-the-clock care to a hobby. They made it sound like I was a house guest who had simply forgotten to leave. The smaller betrayal came at Emmett's 80th birthday dinner. Danielle stood up at the table with a wine glass in her hand and announced that she was officially taking over Grandpa's finances. She had been paying his bills from his own accounts for the past year, handling his insurance claims, coordinating with his bank. My mother looked around the table and said, "Thank God someone responsible is finally handling things." I was sitting 3 chairs away. I had managed his daily medication schedule for 14 months. I had driven him to 41 medical appointments. Lucy had driven us to 6 more when my car was in the shop, sitting in waiting rooms with a paperback for 2 hours because she said the chairs were comfortable. I had held a basin under Emmett's chin at 3 in the morning when his new blood pressure medication made him vomit. But Danielle handled the checkbook, and in my family, the checkbook was the only currency that counted. Emmett looked at me across the table. He squeezed my hand under the tablecloth and said what he always said. "You and me, kid." That was the last birthday he celebrated. He died on September 28th. I was holding his hand when it happened. I stayed connected to that family because of him. Every holiday, every dinner where my mother looked past me and my sister talked over me, I stayed because Emmett would find me in whatever corner I had retreated to and sit beside me and say nothing. And the nothing was enough. I should have stopped going to those dinners 3 years before he died. I know that now. I knew it then. But every time I thought about pulling away, Emmett would squeeze my hand under the table and I would stay. He was the reason. When he died, the reason left with him. The funeral was October 2nd. The family rode together in a hired town car. Danielle told the driver there was no room for me. 4 seats, 3 family members. No space for the granddaughter who had been sleeping on the floor beside his bed for 3 months straight. I stood in the funeral home parking lot in a black dress, holding the recipe card, watching the car pull away. My sister was adjusting her earring in the back seat. My mother was looking at her phone. My father was staring out the window. None of them turned around. Lucy was parked 3 rows over. She did not ask what happened. She walked across the lot, opened the passenger door of her Honda, and said, "I already started the heater." That was Lucy. That had always been Lucy. She had carried Emmett's grocery bags when she came over on Saturdays. She had sat with him on the porch telling him about her week while I ran to the pharmacy. One afternoon, Emmett asked Lucy if she was my sister, and Lucy said, "I wish I was." "Mr. Aldridge," Emmett smiled and said, "You already are, honey. You just do not share the name." She never once called what she did a favor. She just showed up and did the next thing, the way people do when they are present instead of performing. The 16 days between the funeral and the estate meeting were the quietest of my life. I stayed at the lake house alone. I kept the porch light on because Emmett had always kept it on. I folded his blankets and left them on his chair. I did not move his coffee mug from the shelf above the sink. Lucy came over twice with groceries I had not asked for and left them on the counter without commentary. My mother did not call. My father did not call. Danielle texted once, Harris's office, October 20th, 10 a.m., be on time. No condolences, no how are you holding up. A calendar entry. That was all I was worth. Harris Quinlan's conference room had a rectangular table, 6 rolling chairs, and a window that faced the parking lot. I could see Lucy's car from where I sat. She had offered to come inside. I told her to wait. This was not something I needed backup for. It was something I needed to sit through with my spine straight and my wallet in my jacket. Danielle arrived first, wearing the navy blazer she wore to open houses. She carried a leather folder with a real estate listing sheet tucked inside the zipper. She had already called a realtor named Janet about listing the lake house. She mentioned this to my mother while they poured coffee from the credenza, the way someone mentions a reservation they have already confirmed. Janet says we could list at $800. Waterfront lots are going for $650 in this market. My mother stirred her coffee and nodded. The sooner we move, the better. Property taxes are due in January. $14,200. That is not coming out of my pocket. My father sat down and placed both hands flat on the table. He looked at me once, then looked at the window. Gordon Aldridge had perfected the art of being present without participating. He signed whatever Patricia and Danielle put in front of him, and he never asked what he was signing. I sat at the far end with nothing in front of me. No folder, no phone, no notes. My wallet was in my jacket pocket. I felt the card pressing against my hip through the fabric. Harris walked in carrying one manila folder, sealed with a wax tab. He placed it in the center of the table and sat down. Danielle looked at the folder, then at me. She turned her chair so she was facing the room. Before we start, I want to say something so we are all on the same page. Her voice had the polish she used when she walked a nervous buyer through a closing. Warm surface, hard floor. Wren has been staying at the lake house for 2 years. She moved in to help Grandpa, and we appreciate that. But let us be real about what that was. Wren showed up at the lake house to bake pies and read bedtime stories to an 80-year-old man because she has nowhere else to go. No apartment, no savings, no career, no plan. She was not his caregiver. She was a guest who overstayed, and a guest does not inherit the house. My mother nodded before Danielle finished the sentence. Slow, rehearsed, my father looked at his hands. Harris waited 3 seconds. Then he broke the seal on the folder. Mr. Aldridge amended his revocable living trust on April 11th of this year. The amendment was executed in my office, witnessed by myself and my paralegal, and notarized. I also retained a cognitive assessment conducted by his physician, Dr. Adler, 2 days prior to the signing, on April 9th. Mr. Aldridge was competent at the time of execution. The room did not move. The lake house property, appraised at $780,000, passes to Wren Aldridge exclusively. Sole ownership. The transfer is through the trust and is not subject to probate. Danielle's chair rolled back and hit the wall. She was standing before the sound stopped. That is not right. He was not in his right mind when he signed that. He had dementia. He was confused. He could not have understood what he was doing. Harris did not raise his voice. I have Dr. Adler's written cognitive assessment dated April 9th. I have 2 witnesses. I have video documentation of Mr. Aldridge reading the amendment aloud and confirming the terms in his own words. The file is comprehensive. The remaining estate, Harris continued, consists of approximately $310,000 in savings and investment accounts. These are divided equally among Danielle Aldridge Mott, Patricia Aldridge, and Gordon Aldridge, approximately $103,000 each. The math landed on Danielle's face like a door swinging shut. $310,000 split three ways instead of $780,000 in property going her direction. The realtor she had already called. The listing sheet in her folder. The closing timeline she had already mapped. All of it built on a house that was no longer hers to sell. If this story is staying with you, subscribe to Betrayal Unfolded. Every story here is about the moment the truth walks into the room and rearranges every seat at the table. Danielle sat back down slowly, her fingertips pressed into the table hard enough to turn white at the nail beds. There are two additional items Mr. Aldridge asked me to present at this meeting. Harris pulled a handwritten letter from the folder, 2 pages, front and back. Emmett's handwriting, the same hand that had written the cobbler recipe in my wallet. He read it aloud. To my family. I am writing this in November because I heard something I was not supposed to hear, and it changed what I thought I knew about the people in this room. Harris adjusted his reading glasses and continued. On the afternoon of November 14th, I was resting on the couch in the living room at the lake house when Danielle and Patricia came in through the kitchen door. They did not know I was awake. They sat at my kitchen table and discussed what would happen to this house after I died. Danielle said, and I am quoting because I wrote this down the same evening, "Once grandfather's lake house is in our names, we are throwing that useless parasite out before dinner." Patricia agreed. She said Wren could stay with a friend and that they needed to move quickly before Wren got ideas about contesting anything. My mother's hands dropped into her lap. She pressed her knuckles together until the veins across her wrists stood out like rope. Harris turned the page. "I want to tell you what the useless parasite did for me. Wren moved into this house when she was 27. She cut her hours at work and lost nearly $15,000 a year in income. She sorted my pills every Sunday night. She drove me to every appointment. She slept on my bedroom floor when I was afraid of the dark, which is not something an 80-year-old man likes admitting in a letter that will be read aloud. She made blackberry cobbler with me every Sunday because she remembered that June used to make it, and she did not want me to lose that after June was gone." Harris paused. He was reading, not performing, just delivering what the old man had written in his own hand. Danielle managed my checkbook. Wren held my hand. The house goes to the one who lived in it like it was a home, not like it was a listing. My father closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long time. Harris reached into the folder and pulled out a third document. Stapled, 5 pages. Handwritten notes in the margins. Blue ink. Danielle's handwriting. I had seen it on enough birthday cards and grocery lists to recognize it across the table. Mr. Aldridge retained this document and asked that it be presented at this meeting. It is an unsigned trust amendment that was brought to Mr. Aldridge's bedside by Danielle Aldridge Mott in June of this year. Danielle's jaw stopped. Her mouth opened and stayed open. The proposed amendment would have placed the lake house in a separate family trust with Danielle as sole trustee. Full authority over sale, rental, and proceeds. Mr. Aldridge did not sign it. The margin notes are in Danielle's handwriting. Harris read the final paragraph of Emmett's letter. His voice did not change. Danielle brought this document to my bedroom on a Tuesday afternoon while Wren was at work. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me this was what I had always wanted. She said I was getting confused and that signing this would simplify things for the family. I was not confused. I was 80 years old, and I was lying in my own bed watching my granddaughter try to steal from me in my own bedroom. I kept the document. I gave it to Harris, and I told him, "Put it in the folder. Let them see what she tried." The room did not go silent. It collapsed. Silence is the absence of sound. What happened in that conference room was the absence of ground. Every person at that table had walked in with a version of the story they believed, and in 90 seconds, that version had been dismantled by a dead man's handwriting. Danielle's weight shifted forward over the table. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again with nothing behind it. Her right hand curled into a fist on the table surface, then uncurled, then flattened. She looked at my mother. Patricia would not look back. My mother was staring at a fixed point on the wall behind Harris, and her lips had pressed together so tightly they had vanished into a thin white line. Her breathing was shallow and quick, tight little pulls of air through her nose, each one controlled. Each one forced. She had been in the kitchen that November afternoon. She had agreed with Danielle's plan. She had said before she gets ideas, and now she was sitting in a room where an attorney had just read those words aloud, attributed and quoted in a dead man's handwriting. Gordon opened his eyes slowly. He looked at the unsigned document on the table, then at Danielle, then at the surface of the table in front of him, as if studying the wood grain would give him somewhere to put what he had just heard. He pushed his chair back 6 inches from the table and folded his arms across his chest. Something in his face had shifted into an expression I had never seen from him. My father was a man who avoided reactions the way other people avoided conflict. But in that moment, he looked like a person discovering that the building he was standing in had no foundation and never had. I almost stood up and left the room, almost let Harris handle the rest, and walked out to Lucy's car and driven home. But the card was pressing against my hip, and Emmett's handwriting was in that letter, and his voice was in this room, speaking from a place none of them could reach. The least I owed him was to finish what he started. I spoke for the first time since the meeting began. I was not a guest, Danielle. I was his granddaughter, and he did not ask me to leave. He asked me to stay. Danielle's voice came back broken into pieces. This will not hold. We will contest it. No judge is going to uphold a trust signed by a man with dementia. We will get our own assessment, our own physician, and we will challenge every page in that folder. I looked at her, at the woman who had walked into Emmett's bedroom with a 5-page document and told a sick old man to sign away his home, at the sister who called me a parasite while I was sleeping on the floor beside his bed, at the person who told a funeral car driver there was no room for me. He heard you, Danielle, every word, and he had 6 months to change his mind. He did not. 19 words. Flat, no heat, the way you close a door you are never going to open again. Danielle reached for the unsigned amendment. Harris placed his hand flat on it. That document is part of the estate file. It remains with my office. I stood. I will not sell the lake house. I will not split it. I will not negotiate with anyone in this room. This is the last conversation any of you will have with me about Emmett's property. There will not be a follow-up meeting. There will not be a family discussion. There will not be a phone call next month asking me to reconsider. I looked at my mother. You were in the kitchen when she said it, Mom. You agreed. You said to move fast. I looked at my father. You were there too. You said nothing. The way you always say nothing. I looked at Danielle. If you want to contest the trust, Harris has the cognitive assessment, the physician's video, the notarized witness statements, and the unsigned document you brought to a sick man's bedside while his caregiver was at work. Contest it. File the papers. But when you do, that 5-page amendment and every margin note in your handwriting becomes part of the court record, public record. And every client you have ever walked through a closing, Danielle. Every family that trusted you with the biggest financial decision of their lives will read about what you tried to do to your own grandfather in his own bedroom. Danielle picked up her purse. She did not push her chair in. She did not close her leather folder or retrieve the listing sheet tucked inside it. She left both on the table. Her heels hit the hallway tile in rapid succession, the rhythm of someone who needed the exit more than she needed her dignity. The front door of the office opened and closed. Through the window, I watched her walk to her car, get in, and sit behind the wheel for 15 seconds before starting the engine. Patricia followed 6 steps behind. She stopped in the doorway, and her mouth opened. She looked at me the way she had looked at me my entire life, like she was seeing me but not quite registering what she was looking at. Her lips moved. Nothing came out. She turned and kept walking. Gordon was last. He pushed his chair in, which was the most deliberate thing I had ever seen him do in a room. He stopped at the door and looked at me for 4 full seconds without blinking. His mouth did not open. He was not going to say anything. But for those 4 seconds, he looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time, and what he saw made him turn away. He left. His footsteps were slow. He was in no rush. There was nothing waiting for him on the other side of that door except a co-signed loan and a wife who had just been exposed in front of an attorney. Harris and I sat in the conference room for another 10 minutes. He explained the timeline. Trust transfer, 30 to 60 days. Annual property taxes, $14,200. He recommended a financial advisor and told me that if the family chose to contest, the process could take 6 months to a year, but the documentation Emmett had assembled was, in Harris's exact words, the most thorough estate file I have prepared in 14 years of practice. He also explained that the unsigned bedside amendment constituted potential evidence of undue influence, and that any judge reviewing a contest would see that the person challenging the trust had attempted to manipulate the same trust while the grantor was alive, in his bed, without witnesses. He said it would be, professionally, inadvisable for them to file. I walked out to the parking lot. Lucy was leaning against her car with her arms crossed. She looked at my face and said, "Good or bad?" He gave me the house. She opened the passenger door. "Get in. I will drive." I almost called Danielle that night, almost picked up the phone and said something about the years, about the floor, about the birthday dinner where she announced she was taking over Emmett's finances while I sat 3 chairs away holding his medication schedule. I pulled the recipe card from my wallet and held it under the lamp. His handwriting, the ink fading on the word blackberries. He wrote that card for me. He taught me that recipe, not her. I put the phone down on the counter and left it there. 2 weeks after the meeting, Danielle called. The polish in her voice was stripped away. Underneath was the sound of a person standing at the edge of a number she could not make work. "Wren, I want to apologize. What I said at the meeting was wrong, and I know that. But you need to understand my situation. Gordon and I co-signed a home equity loan to renovate my house. $120,000. The payments are $1,640 a month. I cannot handle that on my salary. If you sold the lake house and split the proceeds with the family, even 60-40, I could pay off the loan and we could put all of this behind us. I will apologize publicly. I will say it at the next family dinner in front of everyone." She was not asking for forgiveness. She was presenting a transaction. The apology was the packaging. The $780,000 was the product. "No, Wren. Please, Dad co-signed. If I miss payments, Mom and Dad are liable. You would be hurting them too. Then you should not have borrowed $120,000 against your house to fund a renovation you planned to pay off with property that was never yours." I hung up, walked to the front door. The deadbolt was old brass, installed by Emmett in 2003. He had never locked it. He used to say a lock makes a house feel like a fortress instead of a home. But Emmett was gone, and the people on the other side were not family anymore. I turned the deadbolt. The sound it made was small and final. I almost answered when she called again 3 days later. 9 in the evening, her name on my screen for 4 rings. The deadbolt was locked. I had locked it every night since the meeting. The lock was the answer. I let the screen go dark. The financial math caught up with Danielle the way financial math always does, without negotiation and without mercy. Her house was worth $215,000 after the renovation, with the new quartz counters and the imported tile and the accent walls she chose from a catalog. But the home equity loan was $120,000, and the renovation had cost another $47,000 from savings. She was carrying more debt than the house could absorb. The $1,640 monthly payment was a weight her income could not move. Without the lake house sale, there was no exit. Gordon had co-signed. That liability was joint and several, which meant that if Danielle missed a single payment, the lender could pursue Gordon directly for the full remaining balance. My mother, who had nodded along while Danielle called me a parasite, was now financially exposed because her husband had signed a document without reading the consequences. Their retirement account, which my father had mentioned once at a Thanksgiving dinner as being enough to be comfortable, nothing fancy, was now the backup for a loan taken out to fund a kitchen renovation in a house they did not live in, for a daughter who had tried to steal from her own grandfather. The realtor Janet left a second voicemail 2 weeks after the first. Danielle did not return that one either. By the third week, Janet stopped calling. The lake house listing that was supposed to close by Christmas never existed. The family that planned to sell my home to cover their daughter's debt discovered that the debt was still theirs, the home was still mine, and the man they had dismissed as confused had outmaneuvered all of them from a hospital bed. Harris retained every document from the sealed folder: the trust, Emmett's letter, the unsigned bedside amendment with Danielle's handwriting in the margins. If the family filed a contest, all of it entered the court record. Any judge reviewing the challenge would also review what the challenger attempted while the grantor was alive and bedridden. Harris called it undue influence. He said contesting under those circumstances would be, in his professional judgment, a strategy that would cause more damage to the contestant than to the trust. They did not file. 3 weeks after the meeting, Danielle sat on her bed with her phone in her hand. She typed a text to me. I did not mean what I said at the meeting. She stared at those words, deleted them. Typed again, you have to understand I was under pressure from. Deleted, started again. Wren, I know I. 4 words. She could not finish the sentence. Finishing it meant holding what she had done in Emmett's bedroom, holding the 5 pages and the margin notes and the voice she had used when she told a sick man he was confused. She was not ready to carry that. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the accent wall of her renovated bedroom, the wall the $120,000 loan was paying for, the wall that used to feel like an investment and now felt like evidence of a bet she had lost. Lucy told me weeks later. She heard it from Danielle's neighbor, who had seen Danielle sitting in her car in the driveway one Tuesday morning for 40 minutes without starting the engine. The windows were fogged. The neighbor knocked and asked if she was all right. Danielle said she was fine. She did not start the car. She sat there another 10 minutes after the neighbor walked away. Then finally drove to the real estate office and went inside without looking back at the house she had borrowed $120,000 to renovate. The house with the quartz counters and the imported tile and the accent walls. The house that was supposed to be paid for by selling the lake house. The house that now cost more per month than she could carry alone. And she was alone. Nobody was coming to help. Patricia called Gordon on a Tuesday night. He was in the driveway. She asked him to come inside. He said he would be in shortly. He sat in his truck for 20 more minutes. When he came in, she asked if he had heard from me. She is not going to call us, Pat. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, already concluded. Patricia picked up a kitchen towel and folded it 3 times, pressing each crease with the heel of her hand. She set it on the counter and did not call me again. Months passed. The trust transferred cleanly. The lake house was mine. My name on the deed, recorded at the county office, filed and permanent. Nobody contested. Nobody filed. The unsigned amendment sat in Harris's office in a sealed file, waiting for a challenge that never came. Danielle's reputation at the real estate office, her standing in a profession built entirely on trust, depended on that document never entering a public courtroom. She knew it. Patricia knew it. Gordon, who had signed everything without reading and questioned nothing without prompting, sat in his truck in his own driveway and understood for the first time what his silence had cost. My taxes to pay, my house to maintain. I returned to full-time at the kindergarten, $38,000 a year, enough to cover the $14,200 in annual property taxes and my living expenses if I budgeted carefully. I had been careful my entire life. It was the thing my family had always mistaken for weakness. The thing Danielle had called being a guest. On a Sunday in late May, I stood in the lake house kitchen. The window over the sink faces the water, and in the late afternoon the light comes in at an angle that turns everything the color of warm honey. Emmett used to stand at that window while I washed the mixing bowls, leaning against the counter with his arms folded, and he would say, "Best light in the county, kid. That is why I built this house facing east." The recipe card was propped against the flour canister, yellowed, stained, the ink on blackberries barely visible now. The blackberries were in a colander in the sink, rinsed and draining. I turned on the oven and set it to 350, the temperature he had circled in pencil after years of going back and forth between 350 and 375. One summer he drew a circle around 350 and wrote final answer in the margin, and we never argued about it again. Somewhere across town, Danielle was sitting at a kitchen table she had renovated to look like a magazine page. Quartz counters, imported tile, a drawer beside the stove where she kept the loan statement face down so she would not see the balance when she reached for a spatula. She had never stood in this kitchen with Emmett's hands over hers learning the ratio of sugar to flour. She had never scraped batter off the counter with him while he told her about rebuilding the dock. She managed his checkbook. She handled his insurance. She walked into his bedroom with a 5-page document and told him he was confused. He was not confused. He was watching. And he was writing a letter that would outlast every word she ever said about me. The cobbler went into the oven at 4:15. I stood at the window and watched the light move across the water the way it had moved every summer since I was 9. The kitchen smelled the way it always smelled. Sugar and butter and blackberries and the faint cedar from the walls Emmett built with his own hands in 1987. He built this house. He gave it to me. And I was going to live in it the way he wanted it lived in. Windows open, kitchen warm. The card propped where it belonged, stained and fading and still standing. In a house that was finally, permanently, mine, I was home. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Betrayal Unfolded and share it with someone who has ever been called useless by the people who needed them most. Sometimes the truth does not arrive with a warning. Sometimes it waits in a sealed folder until everyone is sitting down.